Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this month's InterReach webinar. We are very thrilled this month to have as our speaker Dr. Holly Falk-Krzesinski, who is Vice President of Global Academic Relations at Elsevier, also an adjunct senior instructor at the School of Professional Studies at Northwestern University, and perhaps most inspirational to this particular organization, she's the founder of the National Organization of Research Development Professionals. So she sort of paved the way for seeing that there was a gap in communities of practice for people who make things happen between different, spanning different boundaries. And so we, with that kind of inspiration, banded together as an InterReach community to do a similar sort of very specific type of boundary spanning ourselves. So that's all I'll say for an introduction. Holly can introduce herself beyond this, and I'm very excited to hear about gender and team science from Holly today. Thanks, Holly.
Great, thank you. And Christine, can you hear me all right?
Yes, perfectly, thank you.
Okay, now I'm gonna make a small apology, and that is I just recently got braces. Yes, like some teenager. I wish it would make me look as young as I'm feeling with things in my mouth like this. So please forgive my lisp. It's a little more extreme than I wish it was still, but bear with me, all please. So we have talked about in this forum things related to team science and collaboration, and there's been some interest expressed around issues related to gender and diversity as they relate to team science as well. And this has been a special area of passion for me. I've been involved in both gender and promoting women in STEM initiatives, and then of course in team science. And a few years ago, I actually took time off of work to do a special literature project focused on gender and team science, and to really understand what I could learn from the literature on this topic, and then pulled all of this together into the presentation that you're going to see. So today I'm going to address gender issues in team science from the perspective of advancing and facilitating actions at the organizational level. I'm a big believer in that it is not about fixing the women, but we have to fix the organizations in which the women reside. And so for that reason, we have the main goal of improving diversity, capacity, and quality of human capital by creating more responsive, effective, and efficient research environments for the people to develop and work in. So in my presentation today, I'm going to review the literature that's related to gender and team science, not all of it, but a selection of it, with a focus specifically on evidence-based policy implications that are designed to guide how research institutions can improve their processes and practices that affect how science is conducted and supportive of the people conducting that science. And really start with this because team research, we know, is really important for both scholars and the scholarship that we're involved in. But that means that we need to have it be inclusive. Giving you a little bit of additional background for those who may not know me as well, I spend a lot of time connecting researchers and resources in pursuit of large collaborative projects. I did this for many years in the university in the context of a research development office. Now I do that through industry-university partnerships and alliances in my role at Elsevier. I'm very proud to be the curator of our now almost 2,500 team science reference library, which is a genuine community resource. I'm the curator, but the contributors expand across the science of team science community, Christine, yourself included. Thanks for your recent work on it. I've published in primary research findings that help to inform effective collaboration. I've developed and taught team science courses, including an online one. I was really proud to be the chair of the Science of Team Science Conference for its first 3 years and continued to serve on the planning and program committees. And also I've been a team science consultant for a couple of dozen universities, as well as involved in all 3 national team science initiatives. On the gender-related things, I've been the editor-in-chief of the Association for Women in Science magazine. A point that I forgot to put on here, I am currently the co-chair of Elsevier's Gender Working Group and have been deeply involved in activities across the organization. And then also advise on the development of our own Elsevier's collaboration-related products. So bringing all of that to you today. We have some challenges. We know that interdisciplinary research and collaboration in science are on the rise. We know that team science produces more highly impactful research, but despite decades of efforts, disparities still persist between participation in men and women in science. In the European Commission's Horizon 2020 program, it includes an explicit objective of gender balance in research teams. And what I discovered is that there is a small body of research literature on gender and team science. There's also a body of literature related to diversity and team science diversity more broadly. I'm not going to cover most of that. But what we know is that there's a paucity of the application of research to policy and practice, and that in part can continue to serve as a barrier for women's full participation in all areas and approaches to conducting science in their organizations. But there are some opportunities as well as the challenges. I've already mentioned the European Commission's Horizon 2020 framework, which is their grant-making program. And in one of the frameworks specifically related to gender equality and research innovation is focused on the impact of gender diversity on research and innovation, and then very specifically on gender in teams. And I'm proud to actually be on an advisory board for one of the groups that was funded in this. And they just sent me their report, status report. I unfortunately haven't had a chance to look at all of the great materials, but they're making great progress. So what they're really aiming to do is develop concepts and methodologies for evaluating the impacts of gender diversity in research teams and organizations, focusing on research quality and productivity. At the National Science Foundation within the United States, there's some programs that have been underway and some older ones that have been rolled up into new ones. There's currently the EHR Core Research or ECR program, which is focused on fundamental research in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. And in particular, there's an aspect of it that has replaced what used to be the Gender in Science and Engineering or GSE program. And this new program, ECR, continues to address gender-based differences in STEM education and workforce participation through education and implementation research to lead towards larger and more diverse domestic STEM workforce. So this is research that they're supporting. At organizational levels, they have the advanced programs, which have been, I think it's something in its 17th year, maybe. Maybe it's not that, maybe it's its 12th year. Maybe I've got wrong 5 years. But it's really about developing systematic approaches to increasing representation and advancement of women in STEM careers. Now, nothing specific to teams per se, but I think there's complementarity here. Also, the NSF has a funding program called Stimulating Research Related to the Science of Broadening Participation. So this is really research on interventions and policies and practices that institutionals can engage in. So institutional organizational factors, a deeper understanding of cultural, social, psychological, demographic, and community factors that institutions need to consider, and then economic and policy related components as well. More recently, what we've seen is that there's been a call for data around this issue of gender diversity. And that's a good thing because I love data. I'm a scientist by training, so I'm really keen on the evidence base and data. And I work at Elsevier, which is an information and data analytics company. So we're all about the data. And so two of these calls for data came out in the last couple of years, one from the NIH and the other from the NSF in the United States. The NIH one at the highest levels of the organization said that we really have to have solid body of evidence to understand the impacts of diversity. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the NIH come up with new funding programs in support of that. The NSF, on the other hand, I've already talked about the grant funding programs they have. Also, though, that their director said that NSF will continue to advance equity through data-driven decision-making. And I think that this is really important and also says something about the way our institutions should be focused, and that is on data-driven decision-making. So I'm going to talk about sort of four areas of the literature in gender and teams: gender differences in research collaboration, gender diversity and team productivity and performance, gender differences in expertise recognition and evaluation of performance, and collaboration strategies and networks, a little bit in that space as well. All right, so in this first area of gender differences in research collaboration, let me tell you about a few areas of research. In work done by Roten and Furman in 2007, they looked at women in interdisciplinary science and teams What they say is that their conclusions are a bit more provocative than conclusive. So it was really about launching things, and I think that was good in 2007. But what they found is that there are higher rates of women collaboration, female collaboration in interdisciplinary research centers than might be anticipated due to rates of female membership in those centers. And that women have more formal knowledge-producing collaborations, yet fewer informal information-sharing collaborations. Essentially, they lack an old boys network. We've also seen then in some research that was done by Abramo et al. In 2013 on gender differences in research collaboration, and some much earlier work done in 1997 by Bao and Grain that looked at effects of gender and team composition on perceptions of performance. They used bibliometric approaches to examine gender differences in the propensity to collaborate by fields, disciplines, and forms of collaboration. They found that women researchers register a greater propensity to collaborate in all forms that they analyze: general, intramural, extramural, domestic, except in international collaboration. And I'm going to get to some more findings on that. Collaborations relative to discipline, which may have something to do with differences in network structures between genders, and I'll talk maybe a bit more about that in a minute. And then in work that was done by Ray in 2008. Oh, I should say I will provide all of these references. They're actually embedded within the presentation at the end, and then I'll tell you where to find them within the Mendeley group. But you'll have all of those, and so you can make reference back to the things that I've talked about. They looked at team science and diversity advantage. They said, especially with regards to women, experiences that ask a person to stretch personally or professionally may foster their ability to work on teams. Women and other minorities have an ability to adapt and overcome social obstacles that seem to make them better team players. And it may be that women who have had to struggle are likely to be risk takers who tend to do well in less conservative team environments. Right, so some interesting work in that regard. All right, now getting on to the topic of gender diversity and team productivity or performance. These three things. So in some work that was done back in 1996 by Kyvik and Teigen, and they looked at factors that might influence scientific productivity. So they looked at childcare and research collaboration and the gender differences of those. They used data from questionnaires and examined gender differences in scientific productivity, which is publishing in this case, as a result of the lack of research collaboration. Earlier work demonstrated that teamwork in itself stimulates productivity, and women may be excluded from important networks, so their opportunities for collaboration in research might be restricted. So publishing activity is adversely affected. Women were less likely to have collaborated on research projects with colleagues over a 10-year period. It would be great to see, 20 years later, how these kind of data would change. But what they showed then is women who did not collaborate were less productive. That is, less publications. But this wasn't so for men. So there's one important part is that men were as productive in terms of research publication output, even if they weren't collaborating as much. They did show that young children were another productivity factor for women and not for men. I've also seen some more recent studies that suggest that continues to be so. In work that was done a little bit later in 2013 by Campbell et al., they used citation rates as a proxy for scientific impact and quality of research, and their paper demonstrated that gender heterogeneous teams produce more articles perceived to be of higher quality by peers, right? So this is great. Publications with at least one female co-author tended to be cited 87% more. But if the team becomes too homogeneous with females, citation rate dropped. It does say that diversity is important, and it might also point to issues of implicit bias. That is, if folks are aware that the team is comprised of a majority of women or of all women, that may be viewed less positively. But we have other data that says about teams and diversity in general, that diversity is important for impact. And so, and I speak a lot about, while I promote and very a strong advocate for promoting women in science, I'm a strong promoter of diversity in science, which means that not just on the gender front, but on other facets as well. And we need to be thinking about that so that we can produce the best science. In work done by Baer and Woolley in 2011, where they examined the role of gender in team collaboration and performance, they reviewed existing literature regarding the effects of gender diversity on teams. They showed in their work that team collaboration is greatly improved by the presence of women in a group. Yay! Improvement attributed to group processes of what they called and coined now collective intelligence, which is an indicator of the quality of social interaction processes within a group. They found higher levels of social sensitivity were being exhibited by women in the group, likely with an ability to read nonverbal cues and make accurate inferences about what others are thinking and feeling. Groups with more women exhibit greater equality in conversational turn-taking, enabling members to be responsive of one another. Women are more interpersonally oriented than men. Men are autocratic, women more democratic in their study. Women, they found in the minority on the team, are less talkative than men, and the opposite is true for men. So when men comprise the minority, they tend to work on making sure that they're being heard while in the room. In male-dominated professions, they found also where women are more likely to be a minority, initially gender diversity may have negative effects because of stereotypes, in fact, but benefits of diversity accrue as women's representation approaches parity with men. So this is important, that you can't have just only a token woman. So one woman is not enough, not if you're looking for performance with regards to improvement. All right. Oh, I think I must have gone up. Oops, sorry, I hit too many. Now thinking about expertise recognition and evaluation of performance. In a study that was done by Aparna Joshi in 2011, with one of the best titles of an article, Role Models, Black Sheep, or Queen Bees. And she looked at the effects of women's incongruent status on expertise recognition. This may be some of my favorite research. I'm not a social scientist by training, but the more I read, study, and become a part of the social science community, I have a deep appreciation for what we can learn, because it turns out scientists are people too. And this is some really great stuff, and something that I had not understood could be called into question about someone's expertise. I really thought that expertise and qualifications, especially degrees, were somewhat absolute in how they were recognized, and oh, I'm so wrong. Okay, so in this article by Joshi, she evaluated expertise recognition and utilization in science and engineering research groups where women occupy high status positions in male-dominated work settings. This is what's called incongruent status. So they're the PIs of labs, for instance, in engineering and physical sciences groups. High status, also meaning high educational level, higher degree. These high status females are not perceived as more expert relative to low status males by their peers. So low status meaning men who have lower education and lower degrees. High status males were perceived as significantly more expert relative to low status males. So it turns out that even expertise and degrees confirmed weren't getting people to recognize the value of women on the team. Low status females were perceived as less expert compared to low status males. They examined the context for this effect. The more strongly women identified with their gender, the less likely they are to devalue the expert of high status women on the team. And so that's really helpful too to know. Other studies show that gender diversity of associates with higher gender identification as well. In a slightly earlier study that Aparna had done also looking at this, it came out just about 6 months earlier, they evaluated groups of labs and teams to examine the role of gender in recognizing expertise and contribution to the team. So the first study I just told you about is how one's expertise is recognized by the rest of the team. This now looked at how others are recognizing that expertise and contributions. Gender emerged as the most significant predictor of the ratings lab members received for research contributions and added value to the lab team. Gender, not position, not productivity, not degree status, gender. Women were rated lower by, and get this, by both men and women. This is really critical, by both men and women. Even a slight negative effect for being a female expert. Women with the higher degrees got lower ratings than male colleagues who were not considered experts, and certainly by those who were considered at the same with the same high degrees. A little bit later, Aparna did some additional work and an extension of the previous studies. She studied more than 60 teams of scientists and engineers from a broader range of disciplines. She found that highly educated women received the highest ratings from women, but the lowest from men on their teams. The higher educational status is necessary for women to highly rate other women, though. Highly educated men receive the highest evaluations from women on their teams. So again, we're seeing that lower ratings for both men and women, and that women actually do seem to have to be working harder to be recognized equally. Men did not distinguish between less and more educated men. They simply rated all men higher than all women on their teams. They examined the context for this. What they shared is that more strongly men identify with the gender, the more likely they are to favor men, irrespective of their educational level, and penalize women who have obtained a higher education status by ranking them lower than less educated women on the team. In some work that was done by Bow and Grain back in '97, they investigated gender composition of teams as it relates to performance. They specifically looked at team effectiveness. Members of a team that were gender or racially minority heterogeneous perceived their teams less effective than members of homogeneous teams. Other studies indicate that female team members are less well evaluated by others outside of the team when they constitute a minority of the team. In more recent work in 2013 by Haynes and Hellman, here's another great title, It Had to Be You, Not Me. This was about women's attributions to their own contributions in terms of a team work environment, right? So here in the studies I've just shared, we're looking at others evaluating the expertise and the contributions. This is about individuals rating their own contributions to the teams. Group outcomes are often evaluated as a whole, so it obscures individual contribution, which is essential, especially in academia, right? Because it's not teams that get promoted and tenured, it's individuals. So their study investigated whether women devalue their own contributions in a collaborative context, especially traditional male domains, male sex-type jobs such as engineering and physical science and science overall. Despite a successful group outcome, women working with men are more likely than men to devalue their own relative contribution and to choose their male teammates as the better performers. This is overcome only when women are given direct individual feedback or participated in a specific task that made their individual contribution to success absolutely 100% apparent. Women tend not to self-derogate when working with other women, though, and that's important. So it's a denial of responsibility for success in collaboration can be highly detrimental to women's long-term careers, especially in academia. So others aren't affording the credit, but this denial of responsibility for success is really huge. And one of the things that I've personally been thinking about in my own professional development and management, but it also says something about how we set up evaluations of people and an understanding of self-evaluation as well as evaluation by others within an organization. All right, thinking about collaboration strategies and networks, let me tell you a little bit about some of that research. So in some of the same studies done by Josie in 2010, gender was an important predictor of centrality in lab teams. Women occupied less central positions in laboratory networks than men did. In fact, men were 600% more likely than women to be highly central in their networks. Being an expert female allowed women to narrow that gap somewhat, but of course they weren't being recognized for their expertise. Network centrality predicts more important outcomes, such as ratings individuals receive from fellow team members on their research contributions and value to the team. So kind of taking us back to this previous work that I studied. Some other neat is work that was done, an unpublished study by a grad student out of Iowa, and that women need to be more well-connected to their networks than men to be successful. So really leverage those networks. In some work that was just done last year by Misra et al., collaboration called Collaboration and Gender Equity among Academic Scientists. They looked at resources, recognition, and relationships that are necessary for launching research collaboration. They're differentially unavailable to women in universities, though. They examined how men and women faculty in STEM disciplines experience and understand collaboration. Men and senior women expressed greater outward frustration about the lack of resources. Women were more likely to identify their own inability to access resources needed for collaboration. Women were much more concerned with not being recognized for their contributions to collaborative research. Of course, we also know they may not have been taking credit for that. Men much more likely to describe informal mentoring that they'd received, which was invaluable to their career development. Remember, Mac, and some of the things I told you very early on, that women tend not to have the same kind of informal networks as their men counterparts. Women are less likely to report this type of mentoring, worried about asking for mentors' time, which led them to feel less certain about making good career decisions. So it seems that there's a differential in how people are building those networks in terms of men and women. Gender differences related to resources, recognition, and relationships were more apparent among untenured men and women compared to full professors. That seems to make sense. If you've managed to survive all the way to full professor, you've done an excellent job of navigating and thriving in your environment. But it probably was an uphill battle for men and women. In a model where access to all three of those resources, recognition, and relationship exists, the authors posit that it will lead to greater gender equality in retention and job satisfaction, as well as career advancement. Really focusing on the fact that relationships and networks are critical for faculty to learn how to access the resources and gain recognition for their collaborative work. It turns out when I was at Northwestern University, in a survey done by the American Association of Medical Colleges, revealed some gender differences there with regard to support for collaboration and team science. This in part was some of what propelled me to become interested in all of this initially. What I'm showing you now is some work by a colleague of mine, Griffin Weber, at Harvard Medical School. This is unpublished data, but he looked and did a social network analysis of internal co-author networks of faculty at Harvard University. And so he did this and just at the medical school faculty, looking at their co-author network over time by age and then by gender. So men are represented in red and women in the blue. And while reach started at the same for both genders, right around age 30, which is just about the time that their faculty are being hired. So it's their earliest career faculty at the medical school there. By even 5 years out, we're starting to see that there's a differential between the network reach for females and males. The disparity in that network reach between the genders continues to grow over time, and it doesn't begin to plateau out until later. And what we see is that women are plateauing their network reach earlier at about 54 years old, compared to when men's network reach plateaus, which is 60 years old. So they continue to grow and build their network and stay strong and continue to gain access to resources at the institution. So if these networks are critical for faculty to learn how to access resources and gain recognition, then this issue of the networks, they are serving men better and that they're managing and leveraging those networks very, very well. This prompted the institution to start to build out interventional strategies and hold networking workshops for the very earliest career faculty at their school. This is really interesting. This is some work I did in 2013 using a platform now called Pure that Elsevier manages. We had a multi-university platform offering at the time that had included women across a number of Chicago area research institutions, universities, and DOE national laboratories. And one of the things was that there was concern that women weren't connected to one another. And so we did a quick and dirty, more or less, collaboration analysis using bibliometric techniques of all of the women at these two universities and at the national labs who were part of the platform, what kind of collaborations already existed and to what extent were one, two, three, and maybe even 4 institutions involved. And it brought to our attention, in fact, not only were there some existing collaborations and some that even included all 3 of the 4 institutions, there were some where we could clearly identify that there were critical brokers across institutional boundaries that were incredibly helpful at brokering these relationships. And we did know who these people were, and so we went and did some follow-up conversations with them to ask about how they were engaging in collaboration. So it was really interesting by a simple visualization to ascertain and quantify the current state of collaboration, we were able to learn a great deal. Most recently, at the middle of last year, I co-led a project at Elsevier, and the product was a big public report called Gender in the Global Research Landscape, and you can access this report online for free, and that's the title of the report. And in that, we did an examination, an overview of research performance, outputs, quality, and impact through a gender lens, and a comparison also of social aspects of research, including collaboration. I'm going to show you some of that. Now, what's also interesting, and I think worth all of you taking a look at this report, is that we did this across 27 different subject areas that cover all knowledge domains, from arts and humanities to the social sciences to all fields across the STEM fields. And we did it for 12 different comparators across the globe. So it's not just the US, but also US as major comparator, the European Union, Latin America, other in Europe, and also APAC regions. So with regards to collaboration, let me show you now here the results of our study with regards to international collaboration. And you may remember that in earlier work I mentioned about women not participating as much in international collaboration. So what you're looking at here is the purple bars represent the women and the green bars represent men. And we're looking at scholarly output or research articles that are published resulting from international collaboration as a share of the researchers' total scholarly output. So it's the percentage of all of their output. What we discovered is that the United States has relatively low shares of papers reflecting international collaboration for both women and men. And I think that was important to note some great regional differences, and we have to be careful about broad sweeping conclusions that we draw. Whoops. So there's other places that do far better. But what we do know is that it's gotten better over time. So if we look at the period from 96 to 2000 and compare that then to 2011 to 2015, is we do see that there's been an increase in collaboration, both for women and men in the international. But for all of the comparators, including in the United States, women's scholarly output is less likely to result from international collaboration than men's. And again, thinking about this issue of networks and recognition and access to resources and self as well as others' recognitions of your contributions and things like getting awesome letters of recommendation for tenure and for promotion. These strong international collaborations help to expand men's networks better than women's. And while there's been an improvement, men have also improved considerably over time, and that this could be one of the major problems for women's ability to be able to extend. And the opportunity then for institutions to be thinking about how to foster greater international collaboration is really important. Now, that also is in part tied to mobility. Although it does appear that in the United States, both men and women tend not to be particularly mobile, that is moving to another country. This happens much more often across Europe. But in part, that has a lot to do with geography. We don't need to move to another country in the United States to go and collaborate elsewhere, right? But there are lots of opportunities for international collaboration. And one of the things may be that funding agencies and universities and research institutions have to have better support for people to be able to do short-term travel to visit a collaborator elsewhere or to help form potential collaborations. So I'll end with this and a really great quote. Whatever women do, they must do twice as well as men to be thought of as half as good. Luckily, this is not difficult, says Charlotte Whitten, the Canadian feminist and mayor of Ottawa. But I'd like to take issue with what Ms. Whitten has said. In fact, being twice as good actually is really more difficult. It is more difficult, and why is it necessary? So the charge, and what I hope you'll take with the resources that I've shared with you here today and bring those back into your institutions, is to help translate the empirical evidence into policy and practice at your organizations. There needs to be a commitment for change because research indicates that both gender equity and research collaboration lead to better science, right? And if we're in support of our research enterprises, then for the sake of that research and our institutions that support it, we need to engage in these better. More research is needed to identify problems and potential causes. So I hope you'll encourage researchers at your institutions to apply for the kind of funding that I told you about. Research and evaluation for intervention, development, testing, and implementation is important as well. And we have to have forums for sharing information and effective practices, and university leadership needs to be engaged in those. For more information, as I've already talked about, we have a Mendeley Science of Team Science public library. And all of you, if you're not already on, can join this. If you go on to Mendeley and you search in groups for Science of Team Science, it'll come up. If you're not already on the Mendeley platform, it will take you about 90 seconds to establish your initial profile, and then you can join any publicly available group or start your own. And within the Science of Team Science group, then we have a folder, and I'm showing this is the desktop version of the site. It has more bells and whistles than the online does, so I like it. And you'll note that there's an entire folder within Science of Team Science. It is about gender and diversity issues in collaboration and team science. I didn't take a new snapshot, but I think we're up to 90 documents in this. So there's quite a bit more literature that I've not shared with you, but that you can make reference to and you can build off of yourself as well. For all of the references that I spoke about in my presentation and shared the findings of, this is the full and complete list of all of those, so it makes it really easy for you to be able to find them. Of course, all of them are in fact in the Mendeley library in the folder on gender and diversity. I also encourage you, if you're not already subscribed, to join the Science of Team Science listserv. It's managed by the NIH, but that is not limited at all to simply the life and biomedical sciences. In fact, it's a very broad interdisciplinary group of individuals. Just so happens that the NIH hosts us, which is a good thing. You can also find some more information in resources such as the report that was done by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, sponsored in part by the NSF and also very proudly by Elsevier here. There was also in the UK, the Academy of Medical Sciences report. It touches only a bit here in gender, not quite as much as some of the things mentioned in the National Academy's report. And in the most recent Canadian Academy of Health Sciences report on team science, there is a section also examining and focusing on issues related to gender and consideration of academic recognition of team science. I also encourage you to go to the Team Science Toolkit, which is a really amazing resource, not just of tools, but also of experts that you can access. And if you are not already registered, please do so as quickly as possible so that you too can attend the Science of Team Science conference that's coming up next month in Galveston, Texas. So I hope to see many of you there. I want to share with you then the resources that I've shared a little bit about at Elsevier that we have focused on collaboration and gender initiatives. On the left-hand side, you're seeing our Fostering Collaboration brochure that provides an overview of all of our research intelligence solutions and where they help to support and foster collaboration. That's available for free download. And then on the right-hand side is the Gender in the Global Research Landscape report that I've already spoken about, and the URL that you can reach to access that report at no charge. Make it a little bit easier too. Here's some of the URLs to download the full report as well as an infographic. Also importantly, I want to tell you that we made all of the data in our report publicly available on the Mendeley data platform so that others can reuse that data and do other kinds of analyses. In addition, all of the references that are in this report are now in another public Mendeley group called by the same name, Gender in the Global Research Landscape. And in fact, there's also a folder in there related to gender and collaboration. So another really important group that I think many of you will be interested in joining. And then finally, Elsevier has launched the Gender and Research Resource Center, a dynamic resource with lots of information both from within Elsevier and external resources as well. So with that, I want to say thank you very much and appreciate you taking the time to talk. And I'll, of course, be happy to answer any questions. And then not only will the recording be posted, but we'll make sure that all of the slides, so Christine, I'll send you a PDF version of the deck, which I had not yet done, but I'll do that as soon as we hang up, so that the slides can be made available for others as well. So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Holly. I was so looking forward to this, and I was furiously taking notes, even though I know you'll share everything and connect us automatically with all the systems. This was just fantastic. I know that we've had a lot of people that are taking advantage of watching the recorded webinars afterward, but still, I want to see if anyone else has questions before I ask a couple of questions that I have.
This is Michael O'Rourke. Holly, thank you so much for...
Hey, Michael. Hello there.
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Yeah, this has been really informative, and I'm excited to take a look at the Mendeley folder a little bit more carefully. I wanted to just highlight maybe a connection between some of the work you were talking about in connection with women researchers sort of downplaying their own expertise and downplaying the, you know, in the context of teams where they're working with men, and the connection between the empirical results that you're highlighting and some theoretical work in epistemology that's been conducted by a colleague of mine, Christy Dotson, who's a philosopher at Michigan State, and she has done quite a bit of work on epistemic injustice, and in particular on testimonial injustice, and focusing on women and people of color and the mechanisms, that sort of structural and institutional mechanisms that exist, which have the effect of kind of inclining people in these groups, you know, more or less marginalized groups, to smother themselves as testimonial experts. And so it's just you know, I was listening to you talk about this and just sort of nodding my head. I know about how this has been developed from a theoretical perspective, and it's really interesting to hear about the empirical results as well. So that's
there's some
really valuable.
Well, I'll follow up with you so that I can learn more, because I always love reading about new areas, and I guess I haven't conquered the world of philosophy yet, so I can work my way. You know, I've made my way from biological sciences to social sciences, so let me move into the humanities now. Yay! So that's good. And there's some other research from the social sciences that have examined expertise and individuals' own recognition of expertise. They looked at LinkedIn profiles, for example, and it turns out that like men much more considerably than women will indicate that they are experts in something in their LinkedIn profiles, for example, right? Which is a beautiful outward facing, you know, I'm staking claim to what I'm good at and what I want other people to know about me. And there's these great exercises I've seen in workshops of it starts with saying, I'm an expert in, and therefore I can help you. And it's a great exercise, and it's about, you know, thinking about what can we do to foster individuals to be their very best and to be recognized and rewarded for doing their best as well. So yeah, really good stuff. I'll follow up with you and get some more information.
And I might, if you think it's wise, put some of that material into the Mendeley folder, just as a sort of theoretical accompaniment to some of the empirical work, if that makes sense. What do you do?
That would be outstanding. I very much welcome new resources being put in by others in the community. It makes it for an incredibly rich and valuable resource for everybody then.
Okay, I'll make sure to do that. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Other questions or insight or willingness to share?
Well, this is Christine, and I have so many things that were so interesting to me about that. One, I guess, just first playing off what you just mentioned, Michael, I wonder if there'd be an opportunity, I'm sure you've worked toward this, to invite you know, a more theoretical, philosophical presence at the Science of Team Science meeting to kind of have a discussion with both the theory and the empirical evidence about this. Know if they've been invited, or could you envision that being of interest?
Well, I'm not sure if we have the invited roster complete for this meeting, but next year the Science Team Science Conference will be at Michigan State, and we can definitely make this happen in the 2019 program if it doesn't happen in the 2018 program.
That's very cool, because what struck me, in addition, I guess not in a scientific sense, but I love seeing this empirical evidence basis that, Holly, you've put so much work into amassing and pointing to all these other reports that have done the same. And in many cases, they underscore what my intuition or personal anecdotal experience would have made me guess. But then, of course, there's all of this, the scientist parts of you understand that anecdotal evidence doesn't translate directly to empirical evidence. And then the woman part of me, maybe in a theoretical sense, I guess, is just kind of negating myself, thinking, oh, well, what biases am I seeing this through? Is that really happening? Can it be that bad? That type of thing. So this is just such a powerful body of work. And I guess my specific question is, I was really interested to see the comparison of the networks over time, and especially given that, on balance, and this is going to be the dangerous area of a broad strokes type of a question, but on balance, I think often that men are maybe more oriented toward a competition versus women oriented toward cooperation, just in as far as just even evolutionary anthropology, what you're oriented toward is creating a network and keeping that going, maybe more often as a woman, and some of the empirical evidence that you presented backs that up. So it was particularly interesting to me that the networks were working better for men over time. And I wondered, given some of the people that I know, is whether you have any knowledge of the trajectory of the women's career paths. Is it normalized for time spent directly year to year in a career, or do you think that dip and decline might be an indicator of whether women maybe step back to part-time during childbearing years, or come back to a career that they left maybe when they are closer to 50? Or do you think that is baked into the data, I guess? And could you speak to whether you think that those career trajectory pieces are looked at in this body of literature?
Yeah, so thus far where I've seen anything about network reach, any confounding factors haven't been ruled out in that. So in the Harvard study, it was simply across all of the faculty in the School of Medicine, done some years back, but it was all of the faculty. And so they didn't look to correct or normalize across anything, simply to be looking at network reach. And there was a reason for this. It was launched by Faculty Affairs, because they also had some anecdotal evidence of disparities. So they wanted to kind of look at that. They knew something about networks, so this was an examination. And even without looking at something that said, well, it could be a result of women taking time off during childbearing years or anything else, what it did tell them is that there is a differential. And that differential matters quite a bit in academic promotion and tenure. And so what can they be offering at the school level there at that institution to help individuals build strong networks in support of their professional goals, so that they can be aware of the importance of those, so that they can develop skills earliest on in their careers to be able to build those out. And so the thing about that is that even with research that hasn't figured out everything that goes into it, an institution can create evidence-based interventions that are supportive of gender parity, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's it. So we want to make sure that the perfect doesn't become the enemy of the very good. And I thought that was a great approach. So no, they don't have more. It wasn't formally published anywhere, this data, although that would have been a cool study for them to do. But this was directly related to what can be done by the institution in support of all of its faculty. Because they're making big investments when they bring faculty into the School of Medicine. And they look at it as, how do we ensure success? Because that is our responsibility. We hired them. It's our responsibility to ensure that they're as successful as possible. And if one of those is related to their networks, then we have a responsibility to help them build the very best networks as early as possible.
That's great. That actually leads almost directly to my next question, which was, of course, I've really enjoyed and use all the time in communications internally in this, at Duke, your publication with Julie Klein about institutional scaffolding, essentially for tenure and promotion for team science in general. And I wondered if that work combined with this gender lens, do you have like a top 3 things list, or a top thing that you think that all institutions could be doing to help take a crack at some of these disparities, whether it's, you know, workshops to try to help women model or understand these things so that they maybe don't disparage themselves, or there are other strong women role models and don't see a queen bee, they see a, you know, a role model instead.
Yeah. No, I do. I think so. So I think one of the things is that there's still at a lot of institutions, the process of promotion and tenure is incredibly vague, right? And I think that one of the things that institutions can be doing is from the outset, from right away when individuals hired as part of the new faculty onboarding, should be a deep dive into promotion and tenure. And an understanding that so much of that is based on recognition, both that which you offer up about yourself that your immediate colleagues will do, and then the broader community in which you're operating in. And for people to understand then how do they build their reputation and garner the recognition that's needed. And as part of that, to be able to then include issues related to building one's network, both the formal ones as well as informal ones, and that access to the resources and connecting with people helps to expand the ability to get recognized. Ensuring having programs that help people to represent themselves best. How do you represent yourself in a bio, in your LinkedIn profile, and then ultimately into your P&T dossier and the components that you need to write for yourself. So I think that it can be all couched and put together in the context of promotion and tenure matters so much about those accomplishments, but it's about the accomplishments and how they're recognized. And that's critically important. So I think that that's one of the big places that can, and institutions need to take that responsibility very, very early on. So I think that probably be it. The other thing that I think is critically important, and as I highlighted in some of the findings, is that women don't get to sit by and just point the finger at men and go, it's all your fault. It's not. It's not all their fault. And in fact, what we need to understand is that we all carry with us a set of implicit biases. We can't help it. We actually need biases to be able to function, but there are biases that can cause problems for us in this kind of thing about recognition, for example, of others' work. And so I think one of the other important things is that there needs to be a rollout of gender, implicit bias training around gender and around gender and minorities. Across institutions very, very broadly. And this too should be done very early on after faculty are brought into institutions. So I think it's, from my perspective, those two things as well. And what we've seen is that there are some institutions, Wisconsin is one that has mandatory implicit bias training now for all of the committees with authority, hiring authority, promotion and tenure authority, and they must participate. I actually think that it's critically important because all of us are involved in recognizing others, helping to create opportunities that we say, oh, you know, I think my colleague would be great for this. That's an informal recognition. And then there's the formal when we go to write letters for people as part of promotion or tenure or for a job. And so we could all benefit from that. Making it optional is a great start, but then what you tend to do is have people working in an echo chamber, people who already thought it was a good idea, who already understood that they have biases, but I think it should be mandated. And I'm really proud to say at Elsevier, we're just starting this now, because you have to start somewhere, and it's a big organization. We have almost 8,000 employees worldwide. We are starting with mandatory training for anybody with line manager responsibility. So we're starting with those who oversee others in a formal and direct way. And so we're beginning to roll that out and very excited about it.
That's fantastic. I really like your point that it falls to everyone, and that also it needs to not be an add-on. I mean, I like the early training right after bringing somebody on board. I also like the idea kind of having, say, every hiring committee having implicit bias training so that it's really a gateway to even joining an organization, is that you're going to be evaluated for whether or not you're going to be able to look past these heuristics and, you know, be as an added person right before you're even brought on board. Can you demonstrate that you're going to be either open to learning or already open to kind of going past these gender biases and other implicit biases that you might have. Well, this has been fantastic. Michael, do you have any other questions or comments?
No, I agree, though. It has been fantastic. And I think that it would be good for us as a community, you know, people interested in the science of team science, to continue making sure that this issue is an issue that's prominent in our meetings and in our in the work that we produce. I think that it's easy for this to get lost for reasons that are related to what Holly highlighted in her presentation. And I think that's, if it does get lost, that damages not only people, but research. And so
research, that's right.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see this become an even more prominent part of the groups that we're part of. Thank you, Holly.
Yeah, thank you for coming today. Really appreciate it. And like I said, I'll make the materials available, Christine, so they can be posted, the deck alongside the recording.
Perfect. And we will post that within a couple of weeks and send it out to everybody so that we can make sure our whole InterReach group gets to see this. I think we could also maybe, as InterReach, possibly take just an internal poll to give you some additional empirical evidence of how many people in these sort of interstitial roles are female. That could be interesting itself.
Yeah, we actually know, so from NORDP, for example, the organization is predominantly women. But they ran into a really quick problem early on, is that the board became predominantly men. This is a huge problem, right?
Wow.
In leadership roles. So, but it's been rectified since then. So it was called to people's attention. And there's diversity and balance, and parity is also about representation, right? So you want to have diversity, but you also want to make sure that that there's good representation of the kind of organization that you have. So my guess is actually, if we looked at InterReach, if we looked at I2S, we know from NORDP, because they have that. I think you'd actually find us that there are more women in these roles. And a large part of it, if you look at it, about this propensity for collaboration and a willingness to put self aside and to be working as part of the team and to kind of get lost in there. I mean, I always said, as a research development professional, I'm perfectly happy to never be in the spotlight on a big research project I've been involved with. I've since learned to say that I'm not perfectly happy with that, but I was really all about the collaboration. You know, what have I done for the team? But I myself have learned something from in looking at all of this literature.
Yeah, well, truly fascinating and useful. Thank you so much, Holly, for your time and insight. And I look forward to seeing you at the Science of Team Science meeting.
Yeah, good. I'm glad I'm going to get to see both of you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, too.
Thank you, Holly. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.